information on how you interact with our program managers and how new ideas get generated and how to work with us. And then I will talk specifically about my office, the Defense Sciences Office, and then hand it off to Justin and John. So just to start, for those of you that don't know DARPA very well, we are an organization that was started in 1958 in direct response to one of the greatest technical surprises that our nation had ever faced. And that was the launch of the Sputnik satellite. And it was a really amazing technological achievement, but it wasn't a U.S. technological achievement. So with a fair amount of chagrin and gnashing of teeth, the government responded fairly quickly with a number of initiatives, one of which was the creation of a small organization called the Advanced Research Projects Agency. And our organization was actually chartered with a single page, and our mission is essentially to prevent that type of technological surprise. Now, if you've ever thought about it, it's really hard to prevent surprise because you can't actually predict the future. So I think our predecessors were pretty smart in figuring out quickly that one way to minimize surprise is to actually spend most of your time creating it. And that's actually what the agency has done really for the past 60 years, very successfully. If you look at the slide that we have, it's a timeline that highlights some of the things that we're most proud of and that you might actually have heard about related to both end products. So on the top half of the timeline, you will see things that our military customers are actually most familiar with, things like stealth technology, uncooled infrared night vision, or unmanned aerial vehicles. Maybe someday you'll be looking back and talking about driverless cars. And on the bottom half of the timeline, you will look at see a lot of the enabling technologies that we've had a real role in. The creation of interdisciplinary material science as an actual field. A lot of the fundamental development of information technology and computer science, ultimately culminating with demonstrations like the ARPANET, which, with a lot of nurturing from the National Science Foundation, turned into the amazing internet that we are all so closely linked to today. Early advances in microelectronics were a big part of what we did, and many, many other things in between, including lots of successes and also lots of failures, because the thing to keep in mind is that DARPA is an organization that really focuses on high risk, high payoff, disruptive kinds of technologies. And if you're going to focus on high risk, it means you have to be willing to take the risk to fail. Now, the way that we operate is only going to be successful if we're part of a really healthy ecosystem that includes the entire S&T enterprise. So that includes all of your organizations. It includes the rest of the government science and technology community. It includes industry. It includes everybody who is working as part of this science and technology sort of force. And our role in that space is to make those really pivotal early investments that help change the trajectory of where the technology and the science might actually go. We're not necessarily thinking about a solution to a problem today, although that might be something that we're interested in. We're often trying to chart the trajectory of the problem space and the technology space into the future to figure out how we might intercept and change the direction of both the problem and the solution space going forward as well. So if you think about that mission, it helps you to understand how DARPA looks on the inside. We have a really unusual business model, which is probably unlike anything that you've ever dealt with if you're thinking about things like the National Science Foundation or NIH or the other service labs that provide funding. So everything at DARPA is really focused on two things: DARPA programs, and DARPA programs are started by DARPA program managers, and it's the program managers that are the heart and soul of DARPA. These are people who come to us from all walks of life. They come from universities on loan to us. They come from other government labs. They will come from industry, from nonprofits, and they give to us 3 to 5 years of their lives and their careers in order to start DARPA programs and to try to change the world. So as you can imagine, they come in with a fairly adventurous spirit. They're willing to take a lot of risks. They are leaders in their technical areas, and they absolutely believe that given their 3 to 5 years at DARPA, they can make a dent in what the future looks like. A big part of their job it consists of constant and active engagement with the technology community. A really large part of that are organizations like yours, are the universities, also laboratories, both small and large businesses, military services, again, nonprofits, and this is international as well as national. We are constantly scouring the world to figure out where those new technology opportunities are for us. And as you can imagine, that ultimately leads to and is supported by the DARPA culture, which is very much focused on off-scale impact. So again, we don't want to make small incremental changes. We want to take big risks so that when they pay off, they lead to big changes. We are not only willing to take risks, but we sort of embrace them and seek them out. And we take great honor in our public service. Again, our program managers are often sort of derailing their own careers in order to come spend time here to serve the nation, and it's something I think we're all really proud of. So the way that we're structured is really around those program managers. At any given time, there are about 100 program managers in DARPA, and they are loosely organized into the 6 technology offices that you see on this slide. You're going to hear in detail about BTO, DSO, and I2O, so the 3 on the left, so I'll just speak lightly to the rest of them. So the thing to understand is that the 4 offices to the left all actually have 6-1 fundamental research dollars and all work actively enough with universities that they often have universities as prime or team leads on their major programs. The 2 offices on the right, the Strategic Technology Office and the Tactical Technology Office, they are systems offices. The kinds of things that they build are actually much more in collaboration with our military customers. So they might build a new type of aircraft or a new type of navigation system. So the things that they build will look a little bit more like the final military product, and they will actually be testing them potentially in a real-world environment. But they also work with universities, just with a slightly different flavor. So they're much less likely to have a university, for example, in the lead role on the development of a brand new submarine. But on the other hand, they are very likely to have universities participating in the teams that are helping to build those. Often the universities are doing some of the higher risk alternative technologies, and they are also constantly engaged in doing what we call seedling studies. So seedlings are one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about in terms of how you work with us. Because what you will often see when you look at the DARPA website, the thing that will jump out at you are DARPA programs. So 2 primary ways for engaging with us. The first and most obvious are to bid on a DARPA program. We actually create typically between 40 to 50 new programs per year. So one of the things I always tell people is if you didn't find the one that just came out this last week interesting, you might wait a week and see if the next topic is actually more to your interest. They're published on FedBizOps and on grants.gov, and you can always set up some type of a search that provides the sort of the keyword search that will make you aware of what's going on at DARPA at any given time. But keep in mind, it's a very, very active pace, and these programs are started by our program managers. So there isn't any planned schedule, and there isn't any real sort of foreseeable path to exactly what we're going to be doing at any given time. People often ask me, what is DARPA's interest in technology area, X, Y, or Z? And my answer is it's really going to depend on what our program managers are interested in and where they're taking it. So a big part of what we encourage you all to do is to engage with our program managers. Our program managers are always in the process, not only of running their programs, but of sort of thinking about what the next program is going to look like. And one of the things that they do is conduct what we call seedling studies. A seedling could be anything from a thought experiment to a simulation to an actual laboratory experiment, maybe some type of a quick field study, something short in duration that proves out some key concept of a bigger program idea that gives us the confidence that it might be worth it to launch one of these multi-year, multidisciplinary DARPA programs. So what you don't necessarily see advertised a lot are these seedling opportunities, because often the ideas for the seedlings come from you. They come from your faculty coming in, making contact with one of our program managers and saying, hey, I'm working on this thing that I think if it were successful is going to completely change the world. You have a dialogue with that program manager and you work through, and ultimately if that idea makes sense, that PI might decide they want to submit an idea through one of our offices, office-wide BAAs. So all of the 6 offices will actually have an open office broad agency announcement that is sort of open 365 days a year that covers a really broad range of technical interests relevant to that office. And those are the things that we are often doing to help figure out how to start the next program, and they move us we like to say they move us from disbelief, because a lot of times the ideas sound impossible. They move us from disbelief to doubt. And with a little bit of doubt, a lot of times we start pretty amazing DARPA programs. So keep in mind both of these opportunities. Keep in mind that on the DARPA program, they are often very multidisciplinary, and they will take expertise from a lot of different areas to actually work. So read beyond the title. You know, we actually had a program not that long ago that we started called Next Generation Social Science. And if you had just stopped at the title and said, you know, I'm not a social scientist, so this isn't for me, you would have missed out on a huge opportunity. Because the reality is, to answer the questions of the program, we need mathematicians, and we need computer scientists, and we probably need some physicists and some engineers as well. But you actually have to dig in a little bit to figure out all the different opportunities that are there. Something to keep in mind and to maybe keep in your back pocket and share with your faculty is sort of what we are constantly thinking about and asking of our program managers. When they want to start a new program, they actually have to answer the questions shown on this slide. It's called the Heilmeier Catechism, and it was started by a DARPA director, a former DARPA director a number of years ago. And if you lose this particular slide, all you have to do is Google some variation of the term Heilmeier. You can spell it really badly and you're still going to find it because it's actually mirrored on tons of websites all over the place. But we find that those questions, they look fairly simple. They are often very, very difficult to answer well. And you really have to push yourself to think about what it is you're trying to do and how is it going to really change the world. So when you're starting to talk to a program manager, we really encourage people to think about these questions, because that's what the PM is going to be thinking in his or her mind. You know, how am I going to answer these things? And the more easily you can help them to answer that question, the more quickly that conversation is really going to take off. So I'm going to sort of summarize what I said, and I'm going to maybe add a few highlights. Just to emphasize, there are 3 basic ways to engage with DARPA, and if I didn't say it enough, you know, I can't say it enough, and I'm going to keep emphasizing it. You want to talk to program managers. This is very, very much a bottoms-up organization. We do not have some type of top-down matrix of how we're going to start programs. Our programs are started by our program managers, and they get their ideas from all over the world, and most importantly, they can get their ideas from your institutions. So send them an email, say, I have an idea, think about those first 2 or 3 Heilmeier questions, and see if you can get that conversation started. If you can't find a program manager that you are able to make connection to, you don't find, you know, our program managers' biographies are listed on the website, so you can get a sense of their background. You can see the programs that they currently run, and you can make an assessment as to whether or not they're the right person to talk to. If you can't find the right person, or if you're not getting a response, you are very, very welcome to email me or any of my colleagues. We will help you do sort of the traffic management. And we will also tell you if we just don't have anyone in DARPA right now that's interested in that space. Because you have to understand that at any moment in time, you know, with that 3 to 5 year timeline, we may not have anybody right now, but we might have somebody 6 months from now or a year from now. So you don't ever want to think of this as a static process. So talk to a program manager. You can also submit ideas to one of our office-wide BAAs. This is how we tend to do our funding for seedlings, which, remember, move us from disbelief to doubt. If somebody is actually just, you know, unable to make that contact with a program manager, they're too shy, it's just not the way that they operate, you can usually submit, say, very short versions of proposals. You can submit white papers, not, you know, ROM, rough order of magnitude estimates. You can submit 1-page executive summaries, and those allow you to sort of get some feedback from the office as to whether it's an idea that has any interest among the PMs in any given office. And then finally, respond to the DARPA program BAAs. These are the BAAs that have arisen out of things like seedlings and other events that have been ongoing for a while. Again, 40 to 50 different ones per year, ranging in topics from like basic mathematics and atomic physics to medicine and biology to cybersecurity, information technology, all the way up through building the next generation submarine or spacecraft. So it's really hard to imagine that you're not going to find something interesting that might get you thinking about what might come next if you take a look at the kinds of things that are coming out of DARPA in any given year. That's the DARPA piece, and I think I am a little bit out of time, but I actually made it easy for myself to talk about my office, the Defense Sciences Office, because if I conveyed to you what DARPA is and how it differs from the rest of the science and technology community, then all you need to know to understand the Defense Sciences Office is that we are DARPA's DARPA. So my organization is very, very much looking at the frontiers of technology. We work extensively with universities. At least 50% of our funding goes to university primes, and I think somewhere between 70 and 80% of all of our dollars actually go to university performance. We focus really on these breakthrough discoveries in order to try to create enabling technologies rather than sort of final products. We work across pretty much any discipline you can imagine, and if you look at the focus areas I've listed here, you can sort of imagine, and you would be correct, that we wrote them in such a way that there is almost nothing you could think of that you'd like to do that wouldn't fit somewhere in this space. So physical systems would include, obviously would include things like physics, chemistry, material science. Human-machine systems really includes any type of interaction, any type of system or science or technology that looks at the interaction between the human side of the world and the sort of the physical space. So engineered and natural systems coming together can fall into that space. It can be anything from humans working with UAVs to some type of a detection system that involves both humans and machines working in concert together. And then sort of to round that out, at the other end we have social systems, which look mostly just at the behavior of human beings. And if you sort of think about it, they bleed into each other pretty easily. And then intersecting all three of those, you have math, modeling, and design. And I will tell you, we live in a really complex world, so we have been doubling down in the last couple of years on the fundamental mathematics and modeling technology that allow us to start to understand and model some of the complexities that occur across the other three focus areas. If you have not had a chance to hear the DARPA director, Arthi Prabhakar, give a talk, I really encourage you to go out to YouTube and find one of the presentations that she's given. She's an amazing speaker, and one of the things that you will hear her talk about are, you can hear her say it directly rather than being paraphrased by me, are the three things that are on this slide. These are some of the factors that shape DARPA's investments. And I'm going to reiterate that our programs are started by our program managers. They don't necessarily have a common theme. But what you will often find if you look across all of our programs is that there is an underlying thread that indicates that these three things are in the back of our program managers' minds. It is a recognition that there are a really wide range of national security challenges. So we have evolving nation states all the way down to criminal networks, sometimes interconnected in ways that you never would have imagined before. And just when you think you understand it, those networks will shift and change. And along with that, we live in a world filled with powerful technologies that are globally available, constantly being sort of invented and reinvented and put together in new and interesting ways. And they're moving very, very quickly. I'm sure you all have that feeling that the world is moving awfully fast. But in direct contrast to that, so those first two statements talk about a world of immense change and great diversity. On the other hand, we are in the military focusing on systems that we are building that often get more expensive, they're slower to build, and once they are done, they're actually more inflexible. So you can see that that trend is kind of going in the wrong way. And so that's been a conversation we've been having for a couple of years now. And so there are a lot of things where we might be talking about biology, we might be talking about materials, we might be talking about cyber, but a lot of what we're talking about is how we give the Department of Defense better options, faster options, more flexible options, maybe less expensive options. So how do we really focus on that cost, pace, and sort of inflexibility side of the house as an underlying theme? Again, there is absolutely no set of hard rules in terms of what our programs do at DARPA, other than that we focus on game-changing solutions for national security. So you will see some of these things if you're trying to think of ways to look at how the science that's being done in your institution might be relevant. This might give you a lens that's useful to look at, but it's certainly not by any means the only way to think about the problem space. Now, the last three slides I'm not actually planning to go over in great detail, but what I find when I talk to people is they say, this was really interesting in the abstract, Stephanie, so I appreciate that, but I don't actually understand what you mean when you talk about a DARPA program, and I don't know what you mean when you talk about seedlings. So the last three slides are actually just lists of, say, the last 10 or 11 of the new programs that we have started, and the next slide will be some requests for information that we have released, which are things that we do when we're getting ready to sort of search the space to see who's doing what in an area that we might have an idea on, and then a handful of seedlings that we have recently funded. So what I want you to pay attention to on this slide is simply the variety and the pace. These are just DSOs. So again, 40 to 50 coming out of all of DARPA. These are what have come out of my office, and you will notice that you were leaping around in topics from fundamental mathematics to UAVs to material science to optics to chemistry, over to a little bit more math, some atomic physics, social science, and material design. So that's a pretty broad mixture of things. And again, if one of those hadn't interested your people, then they might find that the next one would have actually been of greater interest. And then look at the dates on the right-hand column. Look at the fact that you might, at one point around the end of 2014 and the start of 2015, there were actually 3 that came out in the course of a single month. And then you might have a gap for a few months, and you might have a whole bunch more come out at once. This is not driven by a schedule. It's just driven by the readiness of our program managers to get that word out onto out to the community. As they're getting ready to sort of start their new program ideas, they're often releasing requests for information. So if you've gone to FedBizOps or grants.gov and set up one of those keyword searches, you'll have access to these requests for information, or RFIs, as well. And when you have some time later, not right now, but later on, if you want to take a look at these slides, you might actually start to sort of pull a thread between some of the topics that you'll see that came out in the earlier RFIs and the more recent programs that have been started. So you'll actually see that there's a little bit of method to our madness. And you'll also see some things that don't go anywhere, because the whole part of gathering this information means sometimes we discover that it's actually not something to start a new DARPA program on. And finally, along the same lines, here's a list of some recent seedlings. Every one of the seedlings that are on this list are less than $500,000, and they're less than a year in duration. And they are all focused on getting at a single answer to a very specific question that would then allow us to sort of address a broader set of questions, such as we might do in a much bigger and longer DARPA program. So with that, I think I am happy to conclude. I think questions are all at the end. So we will turn this over to Justin to talk about BTO.
Great. Thanks so much.
Oh, by the way, we look forward to your ideas.
All right.
Those are backup slides for people to look things up later.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So again, my name is Justin Sanchez. I'm the Director of the Biological Technologies Office. It's a real pleasure to brief you today on some of the concepts that support the Biological Technologies Office. So to give you a little bit of background on where the office came from, the office actually is a new office at DARPA. It was formed April 1st, 2014, and we had been doing a lot of work at the intersection of biology and technology in the agency before starting the office. But what we recognized at that time is that biology is an emerging player in our national security landscape. And our director said, look, we really need to face this problem head on, and we need to have a dedicated office that is working squarely in the space of biology and technology and go at those kinds of problems in a very focused way. So let me share with you a couple of concepts of why we feel that biology is this emerging player in our national security landscape. There's not a day that goes by that when we check in to our news feeds that we see one of these concepts. And it can range from everything from the access to gene editing tools, right? There are high school students that know how to use gene editing tools, and a lot of people are asking, what are the implications of that, and how is it an emerging factor in how we see biology and technology ultimately coming together. Again, not a day goes by that we see the next pathogen emerging in our news feed. So whether that's Ebola, or whether that's Zika, or whether that's the next virus that we don't know of, there's huge issues related to pandemics and infectious diseases that our country and really even the world is facing. So we're thinking very deeply about the implications of these problems. And then the last place that you may see very frequently in your news feed is this concept of neurotechnology, or how the nervous system, the brain, is playing a role in technology development, right? We have unprecedented access to signals that are both coming out of the brain or going into the brain, and we're thinking very deeply about what the implications are of those kinds of technologies. So again, all of this is happening at once, and one of our roles in the Biological Technologies Office is to think not only about these problems, but what the future may hold for these and other problems at that intersection of biology and technology. So again, being a very new office, we started off focusing in 3 areas that are very much related to the issues that I just mentioned on the previous slide. We have 3 main thrusts in the Biological Technologies Office. They focus on neurotechnology, and just broadly speaking, that's thinking of the concepts of taking engineering and interfacing engineering tools directly with the brain. All right, and some common terms that we talk about with respect to that are closed-loop neural interfaces for restoring function. The second area that we're working in is in this area related to infectious disease. And we call it outpacing infectious disease. I really want to bring your focus to that first word, the outpacing. It's really important because for many of the pathogens and many of the issues related to infections that are facing our country right now, more often than not, we're reactive to those issues, right? A virus will pop up, and we have to react to the implications of that virus. But remember back to the mission of Darpa that Stephanie shared with you, we need to get out way ahead of any technological surprise that may be out there. And that also applies to infectious diseases. So we want to outpace infectious diseases, and we want to think about developing platform technologies that could potentially take pandemics completely off the table. So again, very challenging kind of a problem, but again, very much in the spirit of the kinds of problems that DARPA ultimately goes after. The third area I'd just like to share with you is in this area of gene editing, but we frame that concept in terms of tools for synthetic biology. So you may have seen, again, also in your news stream that genetic kinds of engineering is starting to emerge in many different places for medical uses, for non-medical uses. And we're thinking about the foundational tools that support those kinds of developments. And we're trying to put the infrastructure in place in order to understand synthetic biology and to create and shape the impact and capabilities surrounding those synthetic biology kinds of concepts. Okay? So those are the 3 thrust areas currently in the office. With all things at DARPA, things change very rapidly over time. These are not prescribed to be the 3 main areas for all time. We'll rapidly change these as we create new discoveries and learn more about this intersection of biology and technology. Now, one thing that we can never forget in all of the work that we do is the people that we serve. The D in DARPA stands for defense, and when we think about biology and technology and defense, we think about the people that we serve, military personnel. And one of the great things about being at DARPA is we get to interact with military personnel and really learn about the complex systems that they control, the very complex missions that they have to carry out, the extraordinary stress that they're under, and the extraordinary injury that they ultimately sustain in service of our country. So when we think about those next generation biological and technological tools, we think about how can they make an impact in their life. We have this great saying here at DARPA that we don't just do science for the sake of science, we do science to build a capability. And again, we think about that capability with respect to military personnel. So with that in mind, I'd just like to share with you 3 very quick vignettes about how the work that we're doing in this space relates directly back to our military personnel and the impact that it can make. And the first program that I'd like to share with you is a program called Revolutionizing Prosthetics. So the vision of this program was to restore near-natural upper extremity control to military personnel that have lost their limb in service of our country. And we're going to use neurotechnology kinds of concepts in order to restore that kind of function to military personnel. And I'd just like to show you a couple of videos that illustrate how the DARPA process and a very ambitious vision can lead to really extraordinary kinds of technology. So if we just play the video on the left. So this is work done at the Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Laboratory. Our first participant in the Revolutionizing Prosthetics program, her name is Jan. She's completely paralyzed. She's living with a condition called spinocerebellar degeneration. That's a direct neural interface that allows signals to directly emanate from her brain. We can connect those signals directly back to a computer system that can interpret the signals. That's actually what the signals look like when they come out of her brain. And the challenge is to develop technology that interprets those signals and translate them into direct commands for robotic limbs. And we also developed that robotic arm that you're seeing on the screen there as the same size, weight, shape, and grip strength compared to an adult human arm. And it's pretty remarkable. And Jan is using that arm system. She's controlling that arm system just like it was her own arm, just using the signals coming out of her brain. So she thinks about controlling it, and it responds to the control. Jan told us that her main motivation for doing the study was to feed herself chocolate again. It's the little things that make the most impact in people's lives when they're paralyzed. And that was the first time that she fed herself chocolate after many years. Jan can not only control one arm, but she can also control two arms using this direct neural interface. And you can imagine all of the engineering that's needed to do something like this.
Straight down, and left and right and diagonally. I can close it and open it. I can go forward and back.
That is just the most astounding thing I've ever seen. Can we shake hands?
Sure.
No, really.
Yeah.
Like, come right over here?
If you come over
Okay.
there. Wrap your hand there. There we go.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
And I can do a fist bump if you'd like.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it really is amazing, and it really illustrates how the Darpa approach to problems can make the impossible happen. And just for all of those that are on the line here, again, just think about the neuroscience that's needed to do that. Think about the computer science that's needed to do that. Think about the robotics and engineering that's needed to do that. All of those pieces really came together to deliver upon that vision. So I'd like to kind of share with you very quickly, again, an additional angle in this project is that we ran the experiment in reverse. So we said, okay, we can read signals out of the brain to restore movement, but can we also restore sensation? In this video here, we have a robotic arm where we're placing forces on the fingertips and translating those forces directly back into stimulation for the brain to allow somebody who's paralyzed to feel again. So if we play the video.
Index, pinky, middle, index and middle.
All right, so this is an example of, a year later after demonstrating we could do motor control that we could also restore sensation. So the point I really want to press upon here is that DARPA can accelerate technology development, and with the right people and the right ideas, we can really make these impossible kinds of challenges a reality. So that's neurotechnology. Let's shift gears and go to the next slide here. Very quickly, I'd like to share with you one concept related to synthetic biology. We have a program ongoing right now called Living Foundries, where we're developing next generation tools, gene editing kinds of tools to produce chemicals that were not able to be synthesized using traditional kinds of chemistry. So again, kind of to unpack this idea, we have traditional chemistries that are readily available to us, but we're asking the question, can we take biology and reprogram biology in order to produce products that may be of relevance to us? Now, again, sounds like a very complex and difficult kind of an idea, and it is, and the tools don't necessarily exist today in order to do that. So being DARPA, we say, okay, how can we go about doing that, and who has the ideas ultimately to bring that kind of an idea to life? So what we did, we set out to find people that could develop computational infrastructures that could design the gene editing that we would need to program living cells to do this. We need to develop foundries once we have kind of the programming to do that for the organisms. And then we need to harvest the outputs from those foundries and test to see if those chemicals that are produced have relevance, if they have potency, if they have all of the things that they were ultimately designed to do. So again, we have this synthetic biology portfolio. We're right at the cusp of creating those new tools, and we see great opportunities in the future for ultimately expanding our portfolio of programs in the synthetic biology domain. So again, really exciting space, in a space that you could have genetic engineers, systems engineers, all kind of coming together under one umbrella. Okay? The third area that I would like to share with you today is in that last space of outpacing infectious disease. And the vignette that I'd like to share on this one is related to a program that we have called ADEPT. Now again, remember I mentioned that every day we are faced with new kinds of pandemics, and we're asking the question, how do we get way out ahead of that? And our particular perspective and approach on this is to think about creating fire breaks. And in order to create a fire break, one way that we could do that is to develop new tools for very early diagnosis of where infections are occurring. And if we can identify those infected individuals and understand what either leads to immunity or what doesn't lead to immunity, that we could rapidly develop and identify vaccinations that could be used to help protect the rest of the population. And that goes along with it with another very difficult challenge is how do we scale up the production of vaccines in a way that really scales to large populations anywhere in the world. Again, a very, very difficult problem, but that involves, again, next generation concepts related to infectious disease, next generation tools to identify antibodies, next generation hardware to do rapid local kind of monitoring. Again, takes a wide variety of expertise in order to solve a very global problem like this. And again, while we may have this ADEPT program that is kind of breaking our way into this space, we're looking to expand our capabilities in the infectious disease efforts that we are building, and trying to develop those platform technologies to take pandemics ultimately off the table. So with that, just to conclude, the Biological Technologies Office, very new office at DARPA, but an office that we are trying to tackle some of the world's most challenging problems. But as you have seen in the 3 vignettes that I've shown you, very multidisciplinary kind of space that we need not only life science expertise, but also engineering expertise in order to create those breakthrough technologies for national security. So with that, I'd like to hand the floor over to John Launchbury.
Thanks, Justin. So I'm John Launchbury. I'm the Director of the Information Innovation Office here at DARPA. Justin mentioned how new BTO is. I think there's pretty much always been at least one, sometimes maybe more than one, information office at DARPA over the history. And indeed, as Stephanie said right at the start, some of the early developments that DARPA contributed to were things like the ARPANET, which became the Internet, which obviously is profoundly affecting all of our lives today. And it turns out that advances in information science continue to tremendously affect our lives today. And so there are 3 things that we take as a focus in our office. I don't know that all the offices are 3, but there's something about 3 that it gives you a good substance without sort of being too narrow. So, and I'll talk about each of these areas. The first of them is in cybersecurity. The second is about big data and how you understand what's going on with big data. And the third is an emerging effort to do with how you really get humans and machines working well together. So I'll dive into each of these and just say a few words about them. So let me give a context on cybersecurity. Obviously, it's very much in the news today, and we're aware of things like ransomware and all the other ways that our computers go wrong and people steal things from us. And so the question is, what is going wrong, and why is it going wrong? DARPA is about preventing surprise, and so you might say, well, were we surprised by this? Did it shock us that all of this was happening with these networks that we built? It turns out that DARPA was actually trying to solve cybersecurity in the 80s and then in the 90s, and indeed some of the key technologies that we developed in the 90s have only recently been applied in your everyday systems. So one technique is called address space layout randomization, which DARPA had a big hand in creating back in the late 90s, and has been a fundamental piece that browser companies like Firefox and Google and Apple and Microsoft have applied to their tools to make our systems a bit safer. And indeed, we have seen a shift over the last 5 years to the cybersecurity posture of many of the systems. If you've had a relatively recent upgrade to a system, it's likely to be significantly less vulnerable than a previous system that you might have had. And the fact that we're actually making some progress, that we can start to create what you might call safe neighborhoods of cyber, mean that we're no longer in this state of or no longer need to be in a state of absolute fear of there's a flood, a cyber flood coming against us, what on earth do we do about it? But we can create at least portions of safety. And so that gives us the challenge to think about how do we actually turn it around, and what would it take to win at cyber? What would it take to be able to create systems that people find really hard to break into at any level? And so let me give some examples of some of the things that we're doing in the space of trying to win at cyber. The first is trying to build systems that are secure by themselves. The picture on the left is a speedometer from a car, apparently traveling at 140 miles an hour, but if you notice, it's also in park. And so once you notice those two things, you notice that something strange is going on. And actually, a speedometer like this is just a computer display in your car. And in this particular case, it was an indication that somebody had hacked into the car and had been able to take it over. And so you might think it was a physical measuring gauge that showed you actually what's going on, and then you realize, oh no, it's just a computer system, and it's potentially vulnerable to attack. And so we've been putting a lot of effort into saying, how do you build systems like cars or airplanes or helicopters in a way that makes them not vulnerable to the kind of attack that was demonstrated, this particular one by the University of Washington a number of years ago. And so the High Assurance Cyber Military Systems, the HACMS project, just a year ago was able to do what we call a cyber retrofit on a Boeing helicopter, and was able to demonstrate that a previously vulnerable system had been able to be turned into a cyber secure system that the red team couldn't break into, and even more, if we gave them access to a portion of the platform, they couldn't use that to pivot to another portion. So there's a number of programs that we're driving on just in this space of cyber protection, and I've listed a few of them here that you might want to look on the website to see. In cyber response, the idea there is you may have a system that has some vulnerabilities, perhaps because you weren't the one that built the system and you bought it, and you don't know necessarily what some of the vulnerabilities are. So now how do you do something about those vulnerabilities in rapid response? And so there are a set of technologies that we have there. Let me tell you just about Cyber Grand Challenge, which is a competition that we're running out in Las Vegas this summer. And here we're going to have computers, a team of 7 computers, all working against one another and trying to defend their own software against the hacking attempts from the other computers. So each computer is trying to break into the other computers, and it's trying to defend itself from being broken into. So big fun and great science will take place out in Las Vegas early in August. So look up Cyber Grand Challenge. And then in cyber operations, more and more the military is standing up groups of people who are able to protect our cyber systems in very active ways. And we recognize that cyberspace is another place where conflict takes place, just like land and sea and air and places like that. So in cyberspace, you may have adversaries working against one another. And so Plan X is a way for us to be able to understand what's going on across the internet. Where is it that people are doing attacks? What kind of attacks are they doing? How can we defend against those kinds of attacks? And again, a set of many other programs in this space. So that's cyber. Our goal is to say, to what extent can we turn cyber around and actually have a plan to win at cyber? In the space of analytics, one of the challenges that we have in the modern society is that there's a tremendous amount of data being produced. And this produces all sorts of things that are good, like, for example, up-to-the-minute traffic report. The reason that you know where there's a traffic jam is that all of the cell phones that people are using to move around are reporting where they are and when they're getting stuck. And the various companies are able to synthesize that information and notice that all the traffic is blocked in one place. And so that's really cool, but on the other hand, it also raises challenges about what am I revealing about myself in various things that I'm doing. So analytics is about how do we take advantage of all of that data that's around there to help forward the mission while still standing behind the deep democratic principles that we believe in passionately. So the first part of it, uncover hidden patterns. The idea there is that in various ways that people who are trying to do negative things around the world, for example, terrorism, they're often using things like social media or financial networks or things like that to try to further their mission. And so to what extent, by being able to look at that data that may be publicly available or easily accessible in some other way, to what extent by looking at that data can we find patterns which tell us behaviors and give us an early warning that something is going to occur that allows us to then intervene and prevent some loss of life, for example. In the space of analyzing content that's out there on the web, you might do your Google search or your DuckDuckGo search, and you get information back. But of course, the information that you get back is only a tiny fraction of the available information. You might do a search and there's 100,000 pages that are available, and you maybe only look at the top 5. Now, why are those the top 5? Well, probably because the company that's delivering the search to you believes that it will get the greatest financial return by presenting these 5 to you, a sort of delicate balance in what's the most useful and what will actually give financial reward. And so there's lots of information that's out there on the web that's really hard to find by a Google search. And so we have a number of tools, Memex is one of them, for example, that allows us to do domain-specific search, which matches content that is deep down on the web pages and is able to recognize the same flow of information that occurs in a number of web pages. And this is being used for issues such as how do you combat human trafficking, as you might see people being moved around the world, or how do you combat the illegal sale of arms as various weapons are put up for sale, and we're able to trace those by some of these deep domain-specific search. So extracting and analyzing content that's out there is very important to us. And then we talked about the sort of privacy issues, and on the right is a picture of Brandeis from the Supreme Court's justice from 100 years ago, who had the key notion of the right to privacy. And when he put it forward back in 1890, it was considered a radical concept. But over the last 100 years or so, it started to gain more and more traction in various Supreme Court rulings. And so what the Brandeis program, named in honor of him, is trying to do is to say, we definitely want to maintain the ability of people to give data, to share data, but how do we do it in such a way that they can do that without violating their privacy, without losing the ability to be themselves that we care a lot about? And so Brandeis is looking at applying some very interesting technologies in techniques such as differential privacy to be able to do that. So let me move to the third area, which is symbiosis. And the tagline here is to partner with machines. And the reason that that's a tagline is that we often think of machines as tools. They're things that we use for various purposes. But imagine that you think of the machine as a partner in some sense, where you and the machine are working together to accomplish a particular goal. So first of all, you need to be able to trust that machine. You need to be able to trust the decisions that it makes. And the progress in artificial intelligence has just been astonishing, and we're really proud of that, because a lot of the key developments in artificial intelligence you can trace back to Darpa programs over the last 20 years as we've solidly contributed key insights into artificial intelligence. And so we're getting tremendous ability with being able to take a picture and put a caption, for example, on a picture. And yet sometimes it goes wrong. If you look at the picture of the baby, the caption comes up, a young boy is holding a baseball bat. And so this is an example of the kind of thing that goes on with artificial intelligence, where it's brilliant, it's brilliant, it's brilliant, and then what the heck was it thinking? And you can't imagine that any sensible system would think that that's a young boy holding a baseball bat. And so we need to do significant work on some of these AI systems to be able to understand why they behave the way they do, and be able to be confident and develop trust that they make sensible choices. Again, when we think about great systems, we love being able to talk to our smartphones. Many of you might have Siri, which came straight out of a DARPA program from about 10 years ago. Siri, again, has this property of it's wonderful, and then I'm so frustrated because it just doesn't get what I'm trying to say. And so one of the challenges is that even our best systems for being able to pick up the understanding of verbal speech have a very superficial understanding of what's going on. And so the challenge is, how do you get a much deeper semantic understanding of the intent that the human being has as they're giving conversation? And so then how do you have the machine be able to participate with that? And so that leads us to the ultimate vision of being able to have a colleague as a computer who is working with you on a task. The colleague may have their perspective that they're bringing, you have your perspective, but somehow you're coming at it as equal participants. And one of the insights that we believe is really important is that the machine must be able to build models of what's going on in the system underneath. And we're still in very early days. A big mechanism is listed there as a program which is able to read university papers, journal papers, and from that extract information about biological systems and construct large graphs of biological pathways, an order of magnitude larger than the largest that we had up to now. And then in those paths start looking for interesting behaviors. For example, if you try this cocktail of drugs, it may have an effect that would surprise you that apparently is likely to be good therapeutically. So the vision that we have is what do we do with technology to move forward to be able to do, to have computers work as our colleagues. And with that, I'll hand over to Tim to talk more about business.
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tim Applegate from the Contract Management Office. It's my privilege and honor to be with you today. And as the fourth member of the panel, I guess I'm hitting cleanup. And I'd like to foot stomp and address or kind of pick up on some of the issues that Stephanie briefed you on initially with engaging with DARPA. And the focus of my briefing will be how to actually do business with us. And so I would like to start with actually putting some myths to bed here, or to confirm myths. And I've broken tradition with my colleagues, and I'll list 4 myths instead of 3 focus areas. The first one there is government contracting is too complex. And that myth is true. I would say it's a very complex system. I would say it's not bad, it's not wrong. It's developed over many years, and most of the horror stories and frustrations I think you hear that get vetted in the various media outlets is dealing with the major weapon systems development, something that we don't necessarily do here at DARPA, or we don't do at all. And the system has grown to where it is in terms of the help from Congress and to ensure that we spend my mom and dad's taxpayer dollars, your taxpayer dollars, wisely and smartly and appropriately. But it is a fairly complex system. From the latest count, some folks in my office reviewed the Federal Acquisition Reg, which is the major prescriptive document which we follow in federal government in performing acquisitions, and it has over 2,000 pages. The Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement that we use specifically here within DoD has about, or specifically 1,237 pages, and a close third is War and Peace with 950 pages. So from that regard, I would tell you that it is complex. I will tell you, though, when looking at this myth, that here at DARPA, that's not the case, that is not business as usual here at DARPA. And as Stephanie laid out, when we get these outstanding program managers that come in for a finite period of time, 3 to 5 years, if we're to lay out an acquisition strategy or to meet their requirement, and it's going to take somewhere between 6 to 8 to 12 months to do that, that's just not going to work. So we have within the contracting office and the acquisition folks here at DARPA have been able to utilize the built-in flexibilities and those shades of gray within those 2,000 pages of the federal acquisition to use those to our advantage and our benefit. We're all about speed, we're all about flexibility, and we're all about eliminating barriers and entry to competition. We really want to get the best and brightest of the ideas, and I think we've managed to do that. The second myth there, the government only works with defense contractors, that's absolutely false. I think Stephanie's had a figure. I had our folks look just today based on our FY15 expenditures. Between universities and federally funded research and development centers, last year we obligated about 20% of our dollars, so we still use about 70% of our dollars go to what you'd consider traditional defense contractors. But again, in this ecosystem, we want the best ideas, and universities are critical to that innovation system, where we do basic, applied, and advanced technology development and research. That area is ripe for academic engagement. We are constantly looking and developing ideas and methods of soliciting and trying to get to those educational institutions, and more important, or not more importantly, but additionally, those non-traditional companies, those folks that are in their garages and in their basement that may have the next breakthrough technology necessary for national security. So again, here at Darpa, that myth, we don't work just with your traditional defense contractors. We try to involve the entire ecosystem of industry, nonprofits, and educational institutions. The third myth there is companies need a government-approved cost accounting system. That's probably the biggest horror story that we hear and the biggest impediment or barrier to engaging with government, and specifically with the Department of Defense. I would say that's true and false. It's true to the extent if you're working in those major weapon systems acquisitions in a traditional federal acquisition regulation environment, yes, it's necessary to have a government-approved cost accounting system. But for most of what we do here at Darpa, working with grants and agreements and other transaction authority, which I'll explain in a moment, we're really looking for companies that just have a demonstrated general accounting or generally accepted accounting practices, which is the IRS standard and what's used to fuel business in the United States. So it isn't that complex, and we do not require, at least here at Darpa, to have partners that have robust cost accounting systems in everything we do. And then the fourth thing, the fourth myth there is the government wants all IP rights developed under a contract. That's definitely not true. That may again be a very widely held myth and rumor. I will tell you that we as the government have a responsibility to balance what rights we need to obtain for transitioning our products and our technologies, and to use those for on into the future. Again, with balancing that with your need to succeed and take your individual rights and do what you need to do to continue to excel both in the commercial marketplace and abroad. So that I'll tell you that for the most part, we really only use government purpose rights, not commercial rights. We want to use those rights just within the government to use on that program. As Stephanie mentioned, if it's a seedling, if we're doing something there that we think may translation to a bigger thrust or a major program at some point, obviously we're going to think through that at that point and make the decision in terms of what kind of rights do we need. We also we have a lot of flexibility with license agreements, for example, or licensing rights, is to delay those to allow you to make investment and a return on your investment for a period of 5 years or some other period of time before we would try to execute and to march in and use those. The march-in rights strike fear with a lot of you, I understand that, but very few and far between are where we need to use that, because we will talk with you ahead of time to determine how best to serve your needs to make to allow you to make the return on your investment. So let's look at, again, some of the flexibility and innovation that we have here at Darpa that we've used. It's all about speed and reducing contract lead times. Our goal is to negotiate to the maximum extent possible the quickest contracting vehicle to meet the needs so we can excite and delight our program managers. We're currently averaging about a 52-day lead time for negotiating contracts, and let me tell you that when the clock starts for that 52 days is when we actually receive a selectable or a funding decision from our program managers and our tech office directors that says, hey, we want to go forth and engage in this activity with this performer. From the time we get that requirement and we get the funding document, we're averaging about 52 days. We can do things as quick as 30 or 20 days on occasion, but again, that's an average, so case by case, and complexities wrapped around each acquisition are unique. It can take longer than that, obviously. Flexibility, I'll talk a little bit more about contract types in a minute, but again, we're all about flexibility and using a variety of tailored solicitation methods and contracting types to get our program managers what they need. Our current average solicitation, we have a model which is called a model solicitation of a broad agency announcement. That is only 52 pages long. We have, for specific program requirements, developed, for example, in one of Justin's areas for one of his programs, a solicitation that was only 25 pages long, and it had only required a 20-page proposal. So we've really reduced what you would see perhaps from other major acquisition organizations that advertise their requirements on the Federal Business Opportunities page. We've really tailored those solicitations and contracts. As I said, the FAR is very voluminous and has a lot of pages and a lot of thou shalls and wills and do's. We're able to look at those here at Darpa and exploit the shades of grays and to utilize not just specific authorities for Darpa, but what we think are inherent flexibilities in that document. One of the things we do, though, have explicit authority here at Darpa is the utilization of other transactions, which is not a federal procurement-based contracting mechanism. It's outside of that normal federal process or federal regulation, which tends to be burdensome, and I'll talk about OTs. We call them other transaction OTs in a minute. And we also tend to use prize authority significantly, and that again falls outside of the federal acquisition regulation. There are two different prize authorities that we use, and you perhaps are familiar with a lot of the programs that utilize those prize authorities. One's the one that John mentioned already, the Cyber Grand Challenge, is using prize authority in order to execute, get great competition and ideas in that regard. Probably some of the most recent ones were the Darpa Robotics Challenge. That was a prize authority, an initiative. And then with all the news and fervor right now on autonomous self-driving vehicles, Darpa actually used prize authority back in 2004 to establish our first competition for an autonomous self-driving vehicle. So that's been a very effective use of unique authority here within Darpa. And then fairness, this is probably the best for last. I want to emphasize to those of you in the audience and to everybody that I talk to from both a nonprofit, industry, and educational perspective whenever we talk about doing business with Darpa, being fair is critical to our organization. Transparency and consistency is our bread and butter. This ecosystem in which we work and the ideas and the industry and educational organizations that we use to fuel those ideas, we've got to maintain fairness. If the word gets out that we're treating people differently, or that you were robbed on a solicitation, or were treated unfairly, or we're not given an ability to fully express your ideas and have us give you feedback as to where you fell short or why it didn't meet our requirement, that word will get out and it'll further reduce the finite pool of resources and folks that we want to get to get to that next cool technology. So from a competition perspective, my deputy is a competition advocate who's chartered specifically to look at competition within the organization to ensure that we focus in competition to the max extent possible. Right now we're running about an 80% competition rate, which means for all the contracts that we award, 80% of those were competed to the max extent possible. And I'll tell you that that other 20% for the most part come from requirements that we're not able to clearly articulate to the world writ large without sacrificing or giving away some national security interest, i.e. they're classified to a level to which we just cannot express those without doing damage to the United States. So the FAR does give us some wiggle room there to exclude competition, and so I'd say 20% of that comes from a security concern, a rightful security concern, where we wouldn't want to let everybody know what we're doing. The next slide, I hinted at this, there's a variety of award mechanisms, award tools, if you will, that we use. The traditional procurement contracts, which you would see through a federal acquisition reg, are still the primary instrument that we use here. About 80% of all of our awards are traditional in that regard. The next one is the grants and cooperative agreements, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Those grants are different from the traditional procurement contracts, in which they're assistance agreements to support and stimulate accomplishments for public purpose, really for basic and applied research, which is, again, our bread and butter and the things we do most off here, and where we utilize universities and educational institutions. The real difference, everybody wants to know the difference between grants and cooperative agreements, is cooperative agreements require and usually use more specific government interaction. For example, we plan on having program management reviews with you. We have technical interchange meetings. We use program milestone reviews. We could be working on the bench side by side. That's the major difference with a grant and a cooperative agreement. Technology investment agreements are just like they sound. They're really commercial-like agreements outside of the federal acquisition reg, so we have a lot of flexibility in the contract terms and conditions there. But it's really where we're working with a performer that's going to take what we work with together and further cultivate that for a commercial application. And then the last one there is a specific transaction for prototype authority that came about in 1989 that DARPA has used successfully for many years. And that, again, is a commercial-like agreement, but it provides a ton of flexibility in terms of IP rights, government-furnished property, cost accounting systems and standards, subcontract reports, and purchasing systems. So the key takeaway here is that when we solicit in a program announcement, we have a variety of contract awards. So if we have an idea and a performer we need to get to, there's some form, fit, or fashion of instrument that will allow us to make an award. I want to talk about the broad agency announcement just briefly. This is our most common solicitation method. The difference between this and a major weapon system type solicitation you may have seen or be familiar with is there's no common statement of work. We're looking for the best and brightest ideas, where we expect a varying technical approach and ideas to come in terms of a proposal. We do not evaluate proposals against each other since there's no common statement of work. And so each one is developed or evaluated on its own merit. We have a lot more flexibility in communicating with you, the performers and proposers, during the period at which the BAA is opened. Stephanie's already mentioned, we can do white papers, executive summaries, or proposal abstracts to vet your idea, to tell you if we're really interested in that and whether it's worth your time to put energy and effort into a proposal. And then we have industry days where our program managers will brief and expand upon their programs to give you the most information, to be transparent and providing you exactly where we want to go. We've made several mentions or references here about where you can find these opportunities, and they're both, all of our requirements are published on the federal business opportunities. If it's going to be a grant or just a cooperative agreement, we'll post it on grants.gov. And again, Stephanie talked the difference between a program-specific BAA and then a tech office BAA. Again, the program-specific, just as it sounds, it's for a specific program. Tech office BAAs are really, in this case, the 3 thrust areas that each office would publish and say, we're looking for your good ideas and where you can advance the state-of-the-art for that specific office. And then I'd like to conclude and wrap up by just saying again, you can contact the technical office program managers. Their bios and their contact information is on the website. The darpa.mil Work With Us Opportunities website is an ideal place to go and find what we have that's out there right now that we're looking for great ideas on. On that website, you can drill down to the contract management office, get a hold of the phone number, and from my staff, ask me or anybody on our staff, give us a call. We'll get you in the right area or put you in touch with the right program manager to have a discussion. And I think that's it. I apologize I ran a little bit long, but I think that concludes my formal portion. I believe we'll open it up to Q&A at this point.
All right. Once again, I would like to thank all of the presenters. And at this time, I would encourage everyone to provide your questions either in the questions text box that you'll find on the dashboard, or click the raise your hand icon, and I will unmute you to ask your question directly. As questions come in, I'll go ahead and read them off. And if there's a specific presenter it's addressed to, I'll let you know. So for the first question, hold on just one sec. Does DARPA have a program specifically for MSIs? General question, probably for the contracting point of contact. Tim.
Yeah, I'll take that one. From a contracting specific, answer to that is no. We do not have a set-aside. Again, in traditional procurement, there's small business set-asides. Because we're trying to get the best and brightest idea, and we don't know where that may be coming from, we do not set aside specifically or restrict certain programs or solicitations to one socioeconomic program or class. We leave that open, and again, we're looking for the best ideas. We look to evaluate those robustly based on their individual merits, and we make a selecting and a funding decision as appropriate.
Thank you. The next question is, does DARPA have an instrumentation program for physical sciences?
No, we don't. This is Stephanie answering. We don't have an instrument program. On the other hand, unlike NSF and I think NIH, we are much, much more flexible about paying for instrumentation and equipment as part of a DARPA proposal. So if you're proposing to one of our programs and you can make a case in the proposal for why the equipment is necessary, it simply becomes part of that main proposal and you don't have to go through a separate path.
Yeah, and I can expand on that. Again, part of the source selection or the review and the selection criteria for every program that we have or every offering that we're looking to do, cost realism is important in there. And so when we ask you, your ideas and you're answering the 6 questions and providing that, we will look from both a technical perspective and from a contracting perspective that the task that you've identified to execute the program and the work that you're going to do, and in this case to the question, the materials that are required and the property that you need to invest in to execute that, we're going to look to make sure that's realistic for the work and the effort as you've laid out. So sometimes we do see where somebody will propose, they need 30 laptops to do this effort, and we'll question, why do you need 30 when you have 4 people working on it? Those kind of things. So we want to make sure it's realistic, and it just makes, again, common sense as to what you're proposing you need in terms of materials and those kind of things. It's consistent with the way you plan to address and execute your effort.
But if I can add something else to the cost realism, a lot of people think that cost realism means I need to bring the cost in as low as possible. But actually, we just as much test to say, you promised all these things and you're hoping to do it with 10% of faculty time and half a PhD student. That's just not realistic. You surely need much more staff to be able to accomplish what you said. So we look to see whether it's actually realistic, the costs will actually be able to accomplish what's being proposed. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Next question. What shall one do if an idea does not fit neatly into one of the 6 offices?
Well, what I encourage people to do is to look across the offices and look at the DARPA program managers. I mean, what I will say is if you look at their backgrounds, you're often going to find that they don't fit neatly into the 6 offices either. But, and if you're stuck, again, talk to some of the office leadership. That's what people like John and Justin and I are here for, simply to help people get a feeling for whether or not there is someone in DARPA who might be interested. So, the good news is it might not fit into what the offices are doing today. It doesn't mean that it might not be a direction you will help us to go into tomorrow. But on the other hand, we may simply not have anyone who's interested right now, and we will try to let you know that as well. So it's really going to be about the individual people taking a look, doing a little bit of homework.
Yeah, and Justin and I both described the focus areas of our offices, but people shouldn't take those as we only do things in those focus areas. It is a case that for us to do stuff outside of the focus areas, we have to be very strongly compelled as to why it's a really good idea. But we have the flexibility to say, that's a really cool idea. I've got a program manager here who's excited about that idea. I definitely want to support that and move forward with an effort in that area.
Thank you. This question is specifically for Dr. Launchbury. Is I2O interested in the use of complex light for information technology?
Is it interested in the use of complex what? Light
for information technology.
I think, I'm not actually sure what complex light is, but I suspect that might be closer to the MTO office, the Microsystems Technology Office, where they work much more at the physical layer of being able to figure out how to use physical properties of matter and energy and so on to be able to build systems. So the way, roughly speaking, that we think about the division between information innovation and the microsystems technology is to what extent you're dependent on some physical property of matter versus to what extent you're doing something that's purely information theoretic. So it wouldn't naturally fit within I2O. Those kinds of ideas, I would suggest somebody talks to MTO first.
For Dr. Tompkins, what's the typical size of awards for seedlings and regular proposals in DSO?
So for seedlings, I think we tried to at least bound it on the slides. We typically are looking for something that's probably about 6 to 9 months, but I'll expand that to say a seedling can be anywhere from 1 to 2 months long to about a year. When you get to more than a year, you're really not talking about a seedling anymore, and you're starting to impinge on that program manager's timeline. Remember, they're always in a hurry and they always hear a clock ticking. So think somewhere from 3 to 12 months and 1 to 2 full-time equivalent people in terms of that level of effort. So the seedlings that I showed you were all under $500,000, but we have exceptions, and we will have some that are very small and some that are a little bit larger than that. And then for a program, it is going to vary like crazy. It will really depend on what it is it's proposed to do. And we have some fundamental research programs where we might actually have 30 or 40 PIs, all who are doing small pieces of a really big science question. Or on the other hand, we may have questions that we are asking in a BA that actually require 3 or 4 awards across large teams, in which case they're going to look like larger dollar values. So I don't really have a typical number that I can offer. It will really, really depend. I think, as John implied, you figure out what you want to do, and then you think about how much it costs. If the idea is compelling, then we don't try to force you into some type of cost template.
But it's probably in the range like 500K up to about 10 million. Would that be fair?
It could be, but we just did an award that was 50% larger than that top one,
right.
And it was an all-university team.
Right.
So I try not to to put numbers in people's heads because I think they tend to lock on them.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, this next question has some interest from MSRDC as well. And I'm trying to figure out how I should phrase it, but I'll just read it directly as it's provided. Should we submit proposals to DARPA directly or via the MSRDC consortium?
You want me to?
Well, I would say directly. If you're a member of the consortium and want to do something, submit it to either the office-wide or a program-specific. We have done contractual agreements with consortiums, and one of the ones that come to mind, or one of the agreement types, is the TIA, the Transition Investment Agreement, where we've done that with consortia. So we can do both, but I would think responding to a specific BAA here at DARPA would be the most direct route.
Let me throw out one thing, Tim, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think what I would say is maybe if we're talking about seedlings, if you've gotten to the point where you're talking to a program manager and an idea sounds like it's worth doing, because you have a contracting mechanism that's already in place and it's sort of like a BAA, sometimes the PM may say, well, we could do it through the consortium mechanism, because I think I've seen that before on similar things. But to a program, you really have to reply to the questions asked in the program BAA.
Thank you. Question for John and Justin. Would research on information processing in non-silicon-based systems such as biological systems come under Information Innovation Office or the BTO?
I think the answer is yes.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think it could be both, right? And it really depends on, again, identifying that program manager and seeing where their interests lie, and then seeing also, the emphasis in the proposal on, if there's more biology, or if there's less biology, or if there's more information processing, right? It depends.
Absolutely. And I would say that it's not like there's a barrier between our offices. It's more like there's a bit of an overlap between our offices. And if it turns out that when you're talking to either us or BTO about a particular idea, and the view is that would be better in the other office, we will help you find the right person in the other office to talk to. It's not that we say, oh, that's not us, go away, you know, and leave it up to you. We will encourage you and help you try and find the right place.
I think there's even been examples of when there's been co-funding from two offices for a single project. So, you know, also think about the ideas and the possibilities of the ideas, and then we work through the details after that.
Yeah, the offices in some sense are just a convenient way for us to organize the research, as opposed to us making declarations of this is my little empire and that's your little empire or anything like that. We don't think that way at all here.
Great, thank you. Another question for the Information Innovation Office. We are mimicking human immune system to information networking systems for cybersecurity. Is this an area of interest? Which area would it fit into, and what BAA?
Yeah, so we did some work in exactly this area in a couple of recent programs, the CRASH program it was called, and the Mission Resilient Clouds program, MRC. We don't have just now an active effort going on in that space. That's not to say that we won't have something coming up. I guess one of the things that the question makes me think that I may want to clarify is that when the BAA goes out, there's it's not opening up a funding opportunity that will necessarily be open for, you know, the time of the project. Though I'll come back and clarify that in just a minute. The primary funding that takes place with a BAA is within a few months of the BAA coming out. So the BAA will come out, and there will be a date by which proposals need to be submitted. And so when the proposals are submitted at that date, then the proposals are assessed, and strong proposals that will create a coherent program are selected, and those are funded. Now, there may be opportunity for adding occasional individual projects later on, but by far the largest buying opportunity or selling opportunity to a BAA is when it first comes out. So I encourage somebody who has a particular idea, as Stephanie has been saying, talk to program managers and see if they're excited about the idea, because that can have a couple of effects. They may want to fund a seedling in that idea directly. It may affect the way they're thinking about their own program, and so it may influence how the BAA ultimately comes out, in the sense that it's perhaps a richer and fuller set of ideas that are being described for which your idea then naturally fits. So it's not a case that we've got these things open all the time, just waiting for you to find the right BAA to go to. It works a little bit the other way around. And that's the P in DARPA. We're a projects agency as opposed to a funding agency. So we're trying to build things. I sometimes say to universities that whereas an organization like NSF funds research in an area, and it will be distributing money to lots of people to generally pull the area up, at DARPA, our particular focus and method has been to have a view of if I bring a set of technologies together, I think it's possible to accomplish something that's never been accomplished before. And so it's got that project focus. And so what we're trying to do is pull in technologies and research that will address the particular project that we have in mind.
Thank you. Next question. How do you determine which award instrument to use?
It really depends on the performer. Most of our BAA, I say most, a large percentage of our broad agency announcements on the very first page will describe the type of funding award documentation that's anticipated, and we will leave that open. We encourage the performer or the proposer to let us know which kind of vehicle they would like to use, what's more conducive. If you're already set up and have a robust government cost accounting, approved cost accounting system, and you want to stick in the traditional sense of the procurement, cost type reimbursement contract, we can do that. If you're a first-time proposer to DARPA, never done business with the federal government, we can work, probably an OT would be appropriate. It's commercial-like. So it really kind of a waffle answer for you, but it depends. And if we find that proposal and we want to go get it, we'll figure out the right award instrument to make.
Another question for the Contracts Management Office. Under a cooperative agreement, how are intellectual property issues dealt with specifically, or especially if the cooperative agreement involves a number of universities and industry?
Yeah, so let me take an hour to explain that. It's really on a case-by-case basis. Obviously, we'll follow, there's a Code of Federal Regulations 2 CFR 200 and the Department of Defense Grants and Agreements Regulation that will lay out, unlike some of these other transactions which are totally outside the federal acquisition system, the Dodgers will lay out in terms of requirements for IP and those kind of things. So again, I can't address that specifically at this point. Again, if you want to have because again, those discussions tend to go down some rabbit holes, and if you want to talk that, whoever's asking that, please contact us on our webpage and ask that question, and we will dedicate the appropriate amount of time to get you an answer and to fully vet and flesh out your question and answer it for you.
The next question is, how accessible are the program managers for conversations regarding innovative technologies? Are there sub-program managers? How interactive is that office?
So our program managers, in theory, are fully accessible. I'll give you a sort of a shortcut. If you want to contact any program manager directly, look them up on the website, find their name, and first name dot last name at darpa.mil. We'll get to them directly. Now, they're human beings, and what you will find as a program manager, particularly one that's nearing the end of his or her tenure, is probably getting a couple of hundred email messages per day, and so you have to bear with them. They are probably managing multiple programs and are just juggling so many things that their response rate is going to be a little bit less quick than it would be for a new program manager. And you can actually figure that out usually by looking at their biographies, which are on the website as well, which will tell you normally when they joined DARPA. So it's just a little sort of social science hint there. But really they are trying to respond to people as much as possible. And we work with them a lot to try to make sure that even if they're not interested, they simply give you that I'm not interested response as quickly as possible. If you're not getting a response, if you're just running into a brick wall, again, that's where Justin and John and I can come in and help you get to an answer. That answer is not always going to be, yes, we want to do something about it. The answer may be, it's not an idea of interest at this time, or it doesn't feel like a real DARPA idea, and we'll try to explain the thought process if we give you that answer.
I could go a little beyond the question and make a recommendation as to ways to interact with program managers. I think there's a couple of ways that we have people come in and it's not necessarily successful conversation. So one of the failure modes is somebody will come in and they will immediately want to tell us all about the company that they're doing, that they have, or some particular product line that they're selling. And the program managers will tend to glaze over at that point. To some extent, even a university person coming in saying, let me tell you about my research, if that's not actually something that program manager is engaged in, it will be very hard for the program manager to be engaged in that conversation. So just as when a professor is talking to another professor, you need to have a give and take kind of conversation. I recommend that people come to DARPA with that kind of idea, that your intent is as much to learn what is the program manager interested in, what do they care about, what do they see the future looking like, as to share your idea. And so the recommendation I often give to people is, if you can leave the program manager with one new way of thinking about something that they care about, then you've actually made a great step of progress, because that's likely to affect the things that the program manager does in the future. They may actually then come back and reach out to you and say, I'd like to follow on that conversation in some interesting way. As Stephanie said, program managers are people. Many program managers are professors from universities or technologists from industry, so they're highly competent professionals, and encourage people to view them as such, not simply come in order to try and sell from a script.
And just to foot stomp both of these points, before engaging with the program managers, really doing the homework on kind of going to the website, looking at the program manager's bio, finding these areas that resonate well with them. You can see kind of the direction that they're heading, and if you have a complementary, perspective on that, or if you even have an idea that, directly helps that direction, that, also is a way to get attention of the program managers.
Thank you. The next question, as a university, we normally have education components to our research. Does DARPA require any type of education component?
We don't require any kind of education piece. It comes back to this notion that we're fundamentally a projects agency, and so what we're trying to do is build a new capability, so that's not to say that we don't care about the education component, but by far the dominant notion is that of being able to create this new capability and new technology. One of the places in which for us the value of having, for example, PhD students involved or other students involved is the question as to what happens to the technology after it's developed. We definitely want that technology to go out and influence other people. And one way that it influences other people is by graduating students who now have skill in that technology and can take it elsewhere. So in terms of general coursework or things like that that NSF would fund, that's not typically part of a DARPA program, but we do care that people like postdocs and PhD students and even senior undergrads are involved in the process of moving forward the research.
An additional comment that is related to this question. So John was talking about training kinds of programs or educational programs. I'd just also like to bring the attention to the community on the line here that we have a Young Faculty Award. And the Young Faculty Award is looking at a community that's within a few years of starting their tenure track position, and looking for ideas from that community. There is, speaking of myths, just like Tim was talking about, there was a myth, or I think maybe even still a myth at DARPA, that you have to be a senior investigator to work on our programs. And that's not necessarily the case. We're really looking at the ideas behind it, and the technical expertise, the realism, all of those kinds of things together. So we encourage, if you are a junior faculty member, you can apply to any of these opportunities. If you're a senior investigator, you can apply to just the programs. But please also pay special attention that we do have this Young Faculty Award opportunity, and it gets published every year. Okay.
Right, so it gets published typically sometime in the December to March timeframe, and it actually will rotate among 3 offices, BTO, DSO, and MTO, to be responsible for it. And the topics, the subtopics within the BAA will be provided by our program managers across all 3 offices. So the topics will actually change every year, but the proposal burden is actually fairly minimal, and it is an exciting opportunity to get those junior faculty who are sort of not yet tenured and within 5 years of starting their faculty position.
Thank you for that. It looks like we only have one more question. If you have any additional questions, please be sure to go ahead and type them in while we have this group available. The last question that I have is, does DARPA fund multi-university centers?
Not as an institution. So we will not fund the creation of and the maintenance of a center. But if a multi-university center collectively submits a proposal with an idea, we would fund that, similar to any project that we would fund.
Many of our proposals come in as a team of people, and they may be different universities working together or industry and universities working together. Many of our, to accomplish within our projects the vision that the program manager has, it's often multidisciplinary in a very interesting and intriguing way. And so It's actually relatively rare that you get a proposal which is just from a single institution. So you may often get proposals coming from multi-institutions where they're bringing together different kinds of skills and capabilities. So as Stephanie says, if you've already got teaming coming together in the context of some multi-institution thing, that may give you a leg up on creating an appropriate team to put a proposal together. But I'd encourage you not to simply restrict it to that group just because that group happens to have come together. If when you look at the needs of the BAA, you decide that you also need to bring in an additional capability that's not part of that original institution.
And one final question from, oh, actually, we do have another question. Actually, this question is going to be from me. As we get in concepts to MSRDC, is the catechism the correct method to transfer information to the program managers as a first step?
You faded out on us just
I think
at
you're
the
talking
end.
about the Hallmeyer Catechism.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think it is the easiest way. I mean, what you're really trying to do is convey to a program manager what is the idea. And those questions we find are really helpful at framing, helping a program manager or an investigator talking to a program manager frame that conversation. And one of the things that I think we should all remember is, I think the very first Hallmeyer question says specifically no jargon. And it really, really helps. Even when people come out of the same technical community, you often find that you're talking at cross purposes because there's just enough sort of flop in the language and the terminology that sometimes you can't actually convey why the idea is so exciting. So you want to take a step back, figure out how to convey what's exciting, what's new, and what's possible. And then you guys can dive further and further into the details as the conversation goes on. So just use the Hallmeyer questions. Now, it's not a hard and fast rule. Nothing at Darpa is. But use those as a way to frame how you initiate and carry on that conversation. I think it will be helpful.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today. We don't seem to have any additional questions. So if there's anything else that you'd like to add, any closing comments, now would probably be a good time to provide those.
Nope. No, we really appreciate everyone's interest, and we appreciate your time as well.
Thank you. All right.
All right, so once again, I'd like to extend our thanks to Dr. Tompkins, Dr. Sanchez, Dr. Launchberry, and is it Dr. Applegate or?
Tim.
And Tim. Thank you all for your time today. We appreciate the effort, and we'll provide you a copy of the recording for your own purposes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.